The story of Lionel Messi wasn't born in a stadium flooded with blinding spotlights, nor in a final watched by millions of homes around the world. It was born in a humble corner where the streets were made of dirt, where chipped walls spoke of constant crises, where hope was a scarce commodity and life moved forward with the roughness of someone who does not forgive mistakes. Rosario was not the cradle of a prodigy. It was the trial by fire where that prodigy would have to survive despite everything. Because before he became a global phenomenon, before he became a world champion, before he became a cultural icon capable of moving entire economies, Lionel Andres Messi was a small, quiet boy with a gaze that hid more determination than physical strength. A boy who had no idea the entire world would one day know his name, but who already sensed that the ball was his path to escape a reality that felt too big for him. Argentina in the 90s was a wounded nation. A society trapped in endless cycles of inflation, improvised policies, promises that evaporated, and families surviving however they could. The newly introduced currency peg brought superficial stability, but its cost was brutal. Job losses, factory closures, and an uncertainty that seeped into every family's dinner table. Rosario, a working-class city by definition, felt that impact sharply. And in the middle of that silent storm, the Messi family lived with just enough to get by. Jorge Messi, a metalworker, had an honest job, but one fragile to economic turbulence. Celia, a cleaning worker, contributed a modest but essential income. There were no luxuries, no certainties. Only work, effort, and a persistent intuition that life could change at any moment. For better or for worse. In that harsh context, football wasn't just entertainment. It was the emotional language of the neighborhood. It was the escape valve for thousands of children who found in a worn-out ball something that resembled freedom. And among all those kids, one stood out without trying to. Lionel didn't shout, didn't impose his presence, didn't command the others. He was the opposite. Shy, discreet, enveloped in a deep silence. And yet, every time he touched the ball, something happened. It was as if gravity shifted slightly around him, as if the movements of the other players became predictable to him. He dribbled not because of learned technique, but by instinct. By nature. As if the ball somehow knew mysteriously that it had to follow him. That extraordinary gift coexisted with a devastating diagnosis. Growth hormone deficiency was no minor condition. It was a biological obstacle threatening to extinguish his light before it even began to shine. The monthly treatment cost more than $1,000, a figure impossible for most working-class Argentine families and completely unreachable for the Messis. It was a double blow. The child's health was at stake. And his greatest talent, the one thing that seemed to give his life purpose, could be buried forever. Local clubs admired his talent. Yes, but none were willing to cover the cost of the treatment. His physique was too small, they said. Too weak. He wasn't fit for professional football. In a country where football talent overflows in every corner, betting money on a child who seemed so fragile was a risk no one wanted to take. He was rejected repeatedly, not for how he played, but for his body. They called him the little one, the short one, the one who will never grow. And yet, each rejection strengthened something inside him. The conviction that the only way to survive was to keep playing, when opportunities seemed to be running out. A tiny gesture changed his life. A homemade video. A rough, low-quality recording showing him dribbling past opponents as if he were playing with children years younger. That tape crossed the ocean thanks to a fortunate chain of representatives, friends, and coaches. It was a message in a bottle thrown into the sea with no guarantee of being found. But it was. And when FC Barcelona's staff saw those images, they understood they weren't looking at a talented child. They were witnessing a phenomenon. A natural force. Something that appears once in a generation, perhaps once in a century. That video opened a door that had seemed impossible. The chance to travel to Spain and train at La Masia Letters. But the invitation wasn't a guaranteed entry. It was a challenge. Messi would have to prove himself, adapt, survive in a new, strange, demanding environment. In 2000, the family made the riskiest decision of their lives. Leave Rosario. Leave their grandparents. Leave their jobs. Leave everything. Bet everything on the possibility, only the possibility, that a European club would agree to cover the boy's treatment. It was a leap into absolute uncertainty. When Lionel arrived in Barcelona, he was a reserved teenager with a soft voice and a shy gaze. But as soon as he began to train, the coaches were stunned. It wasn't normal. It wasn't logical. At that age, no kid had that close ball control, that mental speed, that surgical precision. He had balance that defied his size, a capacity to change rhythm in tight spaces that couldn't be taught. You either had it or you didn't. Messi had it. And he didn't just have it, he overflowed with it. But Barcelona didn't just see talent. They saw fragility. And covering the treatment around $100,000 was a complicated corporate decision. In the end, they did it. Not out of compassion, not for marketing, but because they sensed that this boy could change the club's future. When Karls Rexek signed the pre-contract on a napkin, he wasn't drafting an improvised formality, he was signing one of the most consequential sports agreements of the 21st century. As Messi grew literally and football-wise, Barcelona began to twist in its own internal contradictions. On one hand, they had the greatest youth talent in recent memory. On the other, the club's financial management was starting to show signs of danger. But at that time, nothing could overshadow Lionel's ascent. He debuted at 17, and the world quickly realized Barcelona had found something more than a player. They had found an identity. Messi didn't play football, he reinterpreted it. However, behind that rise were invisible pressures only he felt. The expectations of an entire country. The need to maintain an inhuman level. The emotional exhaustion of being compared, criticized, analyzed, dissected for every gesture, every movement, every silence. Messi wasn't an extroverted figure. He was introspective, almost hermetic. And yet he was forced to uphold a myth growing faster than he was. For nearly 2 decades, Barcelona lived glorious moments, but beneath that surface, mistakes accumulated. Failed multi-million-dollar signings, bloated salaries, a board more interested in internal battles than in protecting its greatest asset. By 2021, the club was economically devastated, more than €1.3 billion in debt, an unsustainable model and a system on the brink of collapse. Messi's departure wasn't a chosen ending. It was an imposed one, a traumatic exit that left millions in shock. When he spoke in tears at that press conference, the world saw something rarely seen in elite athletes: genuine vulnerability. He arrived at PSG as a football refugee, not as a conqueror. His time in Paris wasn't a failure, but it wasn't home either. It was a place of transit. A place without emotional history for him. And although he won titles, although he scored goals, he didn't recover that visceral connection with the game. He needed something different. Not a higher contract. Not a bigger club. He needed to feel the joy of football again. And that destination, surprisingly, wasn't in Europe. It was in Miami. What happened in 2023 wasn't a signing. It was an earthquake. A completely unexpected twist in the narrative of global sports. Messi arrived in MLS not as a declining star but as a force capable of altering entire industries. The contract he signed with Inter Miami had no precedent. It wasn't a salary agreement, it was an economic ecosystem. A business model in which Messi wasn't an employee. He was a partner. His compensation included a relatively modest base salary for his status between $12 and $20 million annually guaranteed, but expanded into a total package that could reach $50 or $60 million per year thanks to deals with Apple, Adidas, and commercial bonuses. The most revolutionary component: participation in MLS season pass revenue. Every new subscriber driven by him generated compensation. And the data confirmed the effect. Spikes of more than 100,000 new subscribers in a single day after his debut. To that, the contract added the real possibility of purchasing ownership shares of Inter Miami at the end of his deal. Like Beckham, but on a larger scale. Messi wasn't just playing, he was investing, transforming, multiplying, and Miami responded. The club's revenue, previously hovering around $50 to $60 million annually, doubled in 2023, reaching $120 到130 million, and was projected to surpass $200 million in 2024. The team's valuation, once modest, exceeded $1 billion by 2025, an explosive, unthinkable growth. Hotels filled up. Restaurants became fully booked. Local businesses experienced consumption peaks on every match day. The city breathed a new economic rhythm, accelerated by the presence of the most influential Argentine on the planet. But beyond the numbers, the most important change was inside him. In Miami, Messi felt free again. He smiled on the field again. He enjoyed football again like he did when he was a child. And that emotional transformation would become the engine of everything that came next. The true magnitude of the phenomenon began to become evident in the days following the announcement of Lionel Messi. What initially seemed like an important sports move soon transformed into an economic event of dimensions difficult to quantify in real time. Miami, a city accustomed to hosting millionaires, tourists, artists, and business people, had never seen an impact as accelerated as the one generated by the Argentines' arrival in MLS. Overnight, Inter Miami went from being a modest club with a regional fan base to becoming a global phenomenon instantly. Social media exploded with numbers that seemed taken from an improbable case study, from fewer than 1 million followers. The club jumped to more than 5 million within days. And in less than a month, it had surpassed all NFL, MLB, and NHL teams on social media, placing itself above almost every NBA team as well. But this was only the first indication of an economic wave that was just beginning to form and that would soon affect technology, tourism, sponsorships, internal consumption, and even the cultural perception of soccer within the United States. What most caught the attention of analysts and economists was that Messi had not only triggered a massive increase in searches, jersey sales, and media interest, he was generating a deep reorganization of the U.S. sports market. The announcement caused searches for Inter Miami to rise by 2,800%. The pink jerseys sold out within hours. Adidas reported that Messi's jersey became the best-selling in its entire history in the United States. The pink fever flooded the streets, airports, malls, rival stadiums. It was as if the entire city had adopted a new flag, a new color, and as if that flag had only one name inscribed at its center. Stores collapsed, shipments were delayed. Resellers multiplied their prices, and while all this was happening, Apple received a wave of subscriptions to the MLS Season Pass that they had not projected even in their most optimistic scenarios. This was the first time in history that a soccer player had generated such a profound impact on a global technology platform. And that detail would redefine the business model of U.S. sports in the years to come. The contract Messi signed was not a normal sports contract. Inter Miami would obtain enormous benefits from his presence in the league. Messi not only received a base salary estimated between $50 and $60 million annually, he also secured revenue percentages from Apple tied to subscriber increases, profit shares from Adidas, tax incentives for real estate investments in Miami, and even the possibility of acquiring shares of Inter Miami. From a corporate perspective, Messi did not sign for a team. He acquired a strategic position within an entire economic ecosystem. He became a partner, an investor, a growth engine. And what's most remarkable is that many of these benefits activate automatically while he simply plays soccer. Never before had an athlete been integrated so deeply into the financial structure of a sport, and never before had a league allowed an agreement of such magnitude to attract a single person. The impact on Inter Miami was immediate and overwhelming. Before Messi's arrival, the club had an approximate value of $580 million. An average attendance of 17,700 people per match. Modest sponsorship revenue and disappointing athletic performance. In less than a year, the club's value doubled, reaching nearly $1.3 billion. Attendance rose to full stadium capacity. The season ticket waiting list surpassed 30,000 people. Annual revenue approached $240 million, and the club signed more than a dozen new top-tier sponsors. Royal Caribbean, JP Morgan Chase, Publix, and several global companies from completely different sectors began to fight for visibility spaces on the jersey. In stadium advertising, in training sessions, during travel, in any area that could be associated with Messi's aura. The Argentines' presence had transformed Inter Miami not into a team, but into a global franchise comparable to some medium-sized European clubs. The team went from fighting for survival at the bottom of the standings to appearing on front pages in Japan, Korea, the Middle East, Latin America, and Europe. The growth was so accelerated that even MLS had to restructure some internal sponsorship policies to handle the demand generated by the club. But where the Messi effect became truly colossal was in Miami's economy. The Miami-Dade County government published figures that surprised even local officials. The direct and indirect economic impact of Messi on the region exceeded $350 million in his first year. The Argentines' arrival boosted sports tourism. Hotels reached occupancy levels above 92% every time he played at home. Restaurants, bars, taxis, rideshare apps, parking lots, shops, and collateral services experienced weekends equivalent to full high-season periods. Some areas registered temporary increases of up to 15% in tourism consumption tied exclusively to Inter Miami's match days. The Argentines' presence generated movement in real estate buying and selling, attracted new investments, increased the international visibility of the city, and solidified Miami as a global capital of sports entertainment. In fact, some economists compared Messi's impact in Miami to what Art Basel represented in terms of cultural and economic transformation, a magnet that multiplies commercial activity around itself. In the sporting realm, the emotional impact was as significant or even more significant than the economic one. Inter Miami was a team without direction before Messi, last in the standings, with disoriented players, little internal cohesion, and a fan base that had lost faith in the project. The night Messi debuted and scored that free-kick goal in the 94th minute against Cruz Azul was more than a goal. It was a symbol. A spark that transformed the club's narrative. It was as if that moment had marked the beginning of a new mythology around American soccer. From that moment on, Inter Miami became a cultural phenomenon, not just a sports one. Every match turned into a global event, every gesture by the Argentine went viral, every training session had international coverage. And while fans dove headfirst into the madness, the team underwent an internal reconstruction. Bus guys arrived, Alba arrived, and finally Luis Suarez, recovering a chemistry that had already defined an era in Barcelona. It was as if MLS had managed to import a piece of elite European football and place it in South Florida. On the competitive front, Inter Miami underwent radical changes. It won the Leagues Cup, reached an international final, increased its audience metrics to record levels, and went from last place to becoming one of the most watched and followed teams on the continent. Inter Miami matches repeatedly broke Apple TV records, causing abrupt increases in subscriptions and forcing the company to renegotiate advertising spaces and agreements with brands interested. In the global audience following Messi, MLS as a league saw a 29% increase in overall attendance in 2023, and projections above 32% for 2024. But the real transformation was structural. The entire league began to attract the attention of players who, until recently, would never have considered playing in the United States while still competitively active. The Messi effect turned MLS into an aspirational market. The sponsorship explosion was even more impressive. Inter Miami went from 12 to 27 main sponsors in a single year. The figures were surreal. Royal Caribbean signed contracts estimated at $12 million annually. JP Morgan introduced the first large-scale financial sponsorship in the club's history. Hard Rock expanded its investment. And local and global brands renewed agreements by doubling or tripling their contributions. It was as if the club had become an economic center of gravity where all brands wanted to be. Aware that the global exposure generated by Messi was impossible to purchase in any other context at the same price. At the same time, an even more surprising parallel economy emerged. Ticket resellers, resale platforms, content creators, influencers, sports tourism companies, themed restaurants, unofficial merchandise shops, artists, independent designers, all found economic opportunity tied to the Messi phenomenon. A recent report estimated that this parallel economy generates more than $70 million annually just in Florida. In other words, Messi doesn't just move money for corporations in the club. He creates distributed wealth across hundreds of small businesses that depend on his presence to sustain part of their activity. The most revealing thing of all is that Messi planned none of this. He did not design a corporate strategy. He did not act like an aggressive businessman. He did not build a messianic narrative around himself. Messi simply arrived, played soccer, and everything reorganized around him. In a country where major economic successes are usually the result of cold strategies, massive investments, or aggressive marketing campaigns, Messi generated more economic movement than many companies without articulating a single business plan. The ecosystem did it for him. His mere presence reshaped markets, sparked entire industries, and changed the consumption behavior of millions of people. And that is the essence of the mystery. Messi does not behave like a magnate, but he produces economic consequences greater than those of many actual magnates. What's most interesting is that this phenomenon does not stop here. What comes next is the deepest and most unexpected part: how Messi's arrival in the United States not only generated an immediate economic revolution, but also reconfigured soccer's geopolitical position on the continent and opened a new era in which MLS went from being an aspiring league to becoming the next major global sports industry. When Messi signed with Inter Miami, no one fully anticipated what was coming. It was an important signing, yes, because of his name, his history, his legend. But what happened afterward was a systemic transformation. The club, which in 2022 had a very modest value, by 2025 already ranks among the giants of its league and of international football. According to Forbes' 2025 ranking, Inter Miami is worth approximately $1.2 billion, placing it by their calculations as the second most valuable club in Major League Soccer, MLS. Only behind Los Angeles FC, LAFC. That leap to the billion-dollar mark for a club founded in 2018, so recent, with such limited sports history, is no coincidence. It is the direct result of a paradigm shift. In the 2023 to 2024 season, the same Forbes analysis attributes roughly $180 million in revenue to Miami, with an operating profit EBITDA close to $50 million. That figure starkly contrasts with the years before Messi, when the club was still struggling to consolidate itself. In just 2 seasons, the club's value doubled or even more, but the impact is not limited to the club's financial balance. The most revolutionary thing is how the business model of soccer changed in the United States. With Messi's arrival, the league stopped being a minor subproduct, a secondary sports backdrop to become an object of media, commercial, and investment competition. When he debuted on July 21, 2023, in his first match of the 2023 Leagues Cup with Inter Miami versus Cruz Azul, the streaming platform that broadcasts the MLS, Apple TV's MLS Season Pass, registered an unprecedented spike: 110,000 new subscriptions in a single day, compared to just 6,143 the day before. That jump reveals with brutal clarity what his arrival represented: an explosion of demand, attention, and expectations. This subscription surge triggered a domino effect. Not only did jerseys, commercial rights, and marketing revenues increase in value, but the club began to attract high-profile sponsors. Multi-million-dollar contracts, long-term deals, and infrastructure investments. Suddenly, Inter Miami was no longer a sports experiment in a secondary league. It became a global brand. The market reacted forcefully. New signings, elite players, former teammates of Messi, a blend of nostalgia and ambition that gave the squad experience, identity, and above all, international appeal. The club gained capital to expand operations, strengthen its future, and project itself as a first-class global actor, but the deepest impact was happening off the field. Messi's arrival generated an economic earthquake throughout the city of Miami. Tourism, hospitality, entertainment, transportation, dining, retail, everything entered an ascending dynamic. County reports indicate a considerable increase in visitors linked to matches, higher hotel occupancy on game weekends, a surge in restaurant reservations, growth in mobility services, increased ticket resale activity and official merchandise sales, and a general Messi economy phenomenon surrounding the club. That transformation turned soccer into an engine of urban development, a real and measurable economic lever. This type of impact is comparable to what global events or mega sports stars achieved in past decades. But here, the novelty was that this was not a tournament or a one-off event. It was a sustained revolution, a long-term project. A franchise that, thanks to a single signing, reshaped not only its own valuation, but the perception of soccer in the United States and its place in the global market. On the sporting side, the results were concrete as well. Inter Miami won its first significant title after Messi's arrival, the 2023 Leagues Cup. Then it structured its roster with experienced players, built identity, recovered confidence, and rebuilt its narrative. But the true impact is seen in the club's consolidation as a permanent contender, in its ability to attract talent, in its commercial structure, and in its asset value. And 2025 brought its ultimate confirmation. Inter Miami won its first MLS Cup in 2025, the league's top championship. With Messi as the central figure, 2 key assists in the final, the club crowned a project that in just 2 years went from being a conservative gamble to a complete success model. This success is not just a trophy. It represents a before and after in the history of soccer in the United States. Because with it, the sport regained credibility, legitimacy, and visibility. Where there were doubts about the MLS's competitive seriousness, now there is respect. Where there was cultural resistance, now there is global fandom. Where there was underestimation, now there is investment. And most importantly, a new paradigm was created. A paradigm in which emerging leagues can compete not only in money, but in relevance, narrative, media impact, and economic return. A paradigm where signing a superstar is not just an expense, but a strategic investment with returns multiplied in sponsorships, media, merchandising, tourism, and asset appreciation. With his arrival, Messi demonstrated that soccer can be a catalyst for transformation. That it can be more than a sport, it can be business, culture, entertainment, mass mobilization. That it can reshape local economies, change global perceptions, cross markets, unite audiences, and trigger structural movements in industries that once seemed stable. After these years, one understands something fundamental. The numbers are not coincidence. The contracts, the figures, the subscriptions, the valuations, the sponsorships, the titles, they are all part of a larger design. A design that centers on Messi, yes, but whose reach goes far beyond him. Because Messi is not just a successful player. He is a value activator, a multiplier of audiences, an economic lever. And while many analysts wonder what will happen when he decides to retire, the answer has already begun to take shape. The club now has structure, brand, sponsors, fandom, financial muscle, and international visibility. That inheritance, that transformation is the true legacy of his signing. Inter Miami not only won trophies, it won an identity. It won a future. And in a world where sports oscillate between nostalgia, spectacle, business, and social networks, Messi proved that a sustainable, profitable, and transcendent model is possible. That it is real. This is not the end of his story. It is the beginning of a new era for soccer in the United States. For emerging leagues, for global markets, for clubs that dare to dream big. When someone speaks of the Messi effect decades from now, they won't talk only about goals, dribbles, or titles. They will speak of a turning point, a before and after, of how one man changed not just a club, but a league, a city, an industry, and perhaps an entire continent.